Hello baseball fans, welcome into another edition of the British Baseball Podcast. I'm your host Matthew, and thank you as always for joining me on this glorious or average day or night depending on when you listen to this episode, but for me it's Monday the 9th of March 2020. Today's show is a conversation with Charlie Batho from the Sheffield Bruins Baseball Club about how he helped create a team, the things he's learnt, and what we can learn from his year-long quest in a segment we're calling Let's Start a Baseball Club. Before we get started, I'd like to invite each and every one of you to subscribe to the podcast on your chosen platform and leave a review if you like what you're hearing. If you don't, please send me some feedback via any of the social medias you can find the show on, and that's Brit Baseball Pod on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter, and I'll try my best not to cry myself to sleep, and no, I can't change my voice. Well, joking aside, there's been some superb suggestions and feedback, lots more people getting in touch from all over the UK and around the world to offer ideas and people to interview, and without you, the fantastic listeners, this is just me sat in a painting in my spare room talking to myself about a sport I don't really fully understand yet, while trying not to disturb my sleeping toddler. I've also started a YouTube channel where I'm going to upload some bonus material, and also it's another place where you can hear the show too. I've had some great suggestions that I'm hoping time will allow me to complete, and there's some exciting things in the pipeline I can't wait for you to see, so watch this space. If you search for the British Baseball Podcast, the familiar artwork should give you a clue as to which channel it is. So without further delay, sit back, relax, have a cup of tea, not unless you're driving, and pay attention and enjoy my sulphurous tones and Charlie's Leedsy accent. And joining me today on the British Baseball Podcast, I've got a friend of the show and the Sheffield Bruins first baseman and coach, Charlie Batho. Charlie, how are we doing?
I'm good. Thank you very much for having me on.
No, thank you very much for joining me. I know you're on your way to Spain for like a spring holiday lad session stroke training, so I'll try not to keep you too long. So thank you very much for agreeing to join me. As we've talked a bit off air, this is a topic that we've been trying to get discussed well. And I must thank Dave from Twitter at Hayes Unit for sort of prompting this to come to fruition. We're doing a fair bit of research, and some of the teams that I've been speaking to, a lot of them are already established, and there's no better person to have on the show today to talk about what's required to create a baseball team than Charlie, as he was partly responsible for the creation of the Sheffield Bruins team. Charlie, do you want to talk us through the process? Like, what was it that sort of got you in the frame of mind to wanting to start a baseball club?
Firstly, I'd have to say that it was definitely a group effort, but still, it's something that I've witnessed and I've learned from. And the whole reason behind it was we were sort of a group playing in the Blade Runners, and started our own team, and we were sort of founded on a couple of principles. We wanted to be inclusive. We wanted to push, try and win a bit, and really that's how it was born. We were just wanting to sort of expand the sport, and at two ends of the spectrum, the two Sheffield teams have sort of blossomed. We're pushing to be one of the best teams, and they've expanded to get three teams. So really, we're covering all bases, if you pardon the pun.
I just want to add a little caveat in here to any of my family members that are listening, especially my partner, and also the guys and girls down at the Manchester Baseball Club. I'm in no way, shape or form trying to start my own baseball team out of my kitchen. This is just like a fun bit, but hopefully inspirational bit. Maybe you're a teacher, or you run a community centre, or you could even be involved in the scouts, the guides, anything along those lines. Or maybe you're even at university and you just want to start a baseball team because there might not be anything in your area. Hopefully this will give you sort of insight into what's required and the steps that were taken to create a club from someone that's actually done it. So Charlie, back over to you. How did you start off then? What was, as a group, what was it that you looked at first of all?
Well, my thought process started with a conversation with Will Linton, who you had a few weeks ago. At the time, he had a role in BS UK, and I interned for him around the time of this. I asked him to to break down into around 8 to 10 steps what was most important about an infrastructure. And that sort of really gave me a platform to build on where I thought was important to look for a facility to play on, a field. Sort of basically explaining how important to keep the club accessible and things like that, how important sort of toilet and changing facilities were. We highlighted if there was a possible way to play near a leisure centre or a pub, that could be good. The emphasis is kind of put on, and it'd be very nice to play at a permanent field. Sort of having permanent facilities like that are much less important than transport links, because we're never going to be in a point where we can build that. That got pushed up my priorities, and I think we felt quite lucky with that, because we managed to strike up a deal with the council, and they got us onto a site that had a pub on site and good tram links. After that, it was just a matter of getting funds into place to turn it into a baseball field rather than just a football field, which it was in years gone by.
That's interesting. So was it a case of the council gave you just the one site and off you went, or were there other options available? Because I would imagine like a base of operations where you're going to play your games is quite an important thing. Like, was there anything in consideration if you had options like, was it near residential areas so the like kids could see it, or there's more exposure for passers-by?
I submitted one of those online forms to find out more information, sort of thing, and I got a response via email, and it was actually a lot more helpful than I'd have ever expected. It was a portfolio of about 8 to 12 available fields. I shared the details with the team, and we looked about which ones were nearest to certain things and which ones were going to be flattest, and so on and so forth. And there was the one we ended up at, which is just behind Crystal Peak Shopping Centre. We didn't think we'd get, for whatever reason. We looked at it and we thought, oh no, it's probably popular. It's it's in a housing estate. It's next to a big shopping centre. There's loads of pubs nearby.
Sounds ideal.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly thought so in the process, and I thought, it's going to be hard to compete with football for this. So we viewed the sites independently, because booking time to see a council rep was quite difficult. So we sort of narrowed our list down before we got into yeses or nos off them. We then met on the site. It turns out, at the time, I mean, I think that's changed slightly, but at the time there was no football activity, and the goalposts that were there had just been left up. I think it was as soon as on the day they just went, yeah, we'll just take those down now. They need doing anyway. And then suddenly we were just looking at the field, measuring it out, and it seemed like a good fit.
Awesome. So when you were measuring up the field, did you sort of think, try and get these dimensions to be like the Cubs, or did you have a specific field in mind when you're setting the groundwork out?
So one of the nicer features of our field is the sort of the outfield runs along a bank. If you think towards like the spring training games where you see people sat on a bank and home runs go into there, which makes it look like it's a bit more purpose-built. So it's got a nice little flow around. We were originally going to have that behind home plate, which meant that the foul balls would have been less of an issue. However, that's where the biggest flooding was, and we thought we could probably get away with a tiny bit of flooding in the outfield compared to at home plate, because the bank pushes down water. So we avoided that. After that, it was really just on to just trying to get funds in place to get bases down, to get a dirt mound and things like that.
Awesome. So a lot of preparation going into your field selection. With you being a new upstart club as well, how challenging was it to try and recruit new players and get more coaches involved?
Very, very difficult. It was a lot of messaging friends and a lot of no's, really. I was lucky. I think the first year we were maybe 14 to 18 players, depending on the week. It was a lot of turning up as a flat nine and playing through bumps and scrapes and just trying to keep the team going, really. And sort of last year we were pushing 20 people at some games and things like that, so it's definitely trending in the right direction. I guess it's a lot harder to get someone to believe in something that doesn't exist yet, and I'm sure sort of companies probably find that when they're trying to fund products. But yeah, it's a case of if he speaks passionately about something enough that people get involved, really.
Yeah, very true. So have you got any tips for people that would be looking to try and recruit? What sort of methods did you use? Was it a case of walking around that local shopping centre doing flyering or adverts in local papers?
Over the couple of years, turned our hand at almost everything. We've flyered Sheffield as a whole, and we've targeted like gyms and sports centres and places where people are a bit more active. We've done the local shopping centre. But I don't think you can look past just inviting a friend, really. It's hard to imagine a scenario where you know, I mean, I think everyone that I sort of know was invited by a friend rather than seeing an ad. I certainly were. And so on and so forth from that, really. Everyone I can think of now in my head, just going back through, it was, oh yeah, well, I didn't have much to do on a day. I think Ian Blease even said that a couple of weeks ago on the show. He said that 2 of his friends were going to training, and he's been playing in ever since. Same here, tried and tested. It will always work.
So we've now got yourself a base of operations. You've got your little pub on site for after the games and meetups beforehand. You've got your field set up. How did you go about getting your uniforms and equipment? Did you rely on any donations, or did you just go straight out and we're getting everything new?
In terms of the funding, I was quite keen to make a budget just based on team fees and player fees alone for the first year, because I knew it was an amount of money we could depend on, because sponsorship and donations are just amounts that you can't really control. So I was keen to set and try and stick to a budget that I knew we could generate in-house. And since the club has been in much better financial condition, because sponsorships have come in, and that's down to the work of the current board, particularly Tim, who got in contact with the shopping centre next to us, and they help us out a lot.
So I guess anyone that's thinking of starting a team, budget, we know budget is going to be a big part to it. I won't ask you for the particulars, but having some decent backing or a few quid behind you is definitely one that's required. So we've now got our equipment and our uniforms, and we're looking at leagues. So how did you go about selecting which league you were going to take part in?
Yeah, I think theoretically we could probably have gone in a Midlands league. It would have meant that on average we'd probably travel a bit more, but we don't travel to the extremes of like Cartmel, for example. So you're always travelling an hour and a half, rather than sometimes you'll travel a little bit shorter, and then sometimes you'll travel 4 hours or whatever.
Yeah, true. And I follow some of the British basketball quite closely, and the Manchester Giants team. It was only maybe a month or so ago. We're travelling up to Newcastle. They literally had like 6 players in the whole team go up there. And I can imagine being in an amateur sort of sport environment, a grassroots sort of thing like there. There's not a lot of money within the sports. Being sort of like having teams that are around you is something to consider as well. So say, for example, you're north of the border and you're up in Scotland, and you can see there's a couple of teams around Glasgow and there's no baseball in your region. Maybe looking at travelling these distances, if you were thinking of starting a team, the impact on that, because it's not just half an hour drive to your house. It could be from your house to the field. Sorry, you've also got to take in consideration in Manchester to Newcastle, like you said, Sheffield to Newcastle. It's a 3 hours, 4 hours drive, and then you've got the games to play, and you've got to come home. It's pretty much an entire day devoted to the sport. Yeah,
and even for home games, you've got to set up the field, and it's a sport that does take nearly a 9 to 5 off you on a Sunday to get 2 games in and do all sorts. I mean, if everyone had permanent fields, it would maybe be a 4.5 hour day, and you get home and you've still got a bit of time on a Sunday. So I think people are conscious of that. I think no one's making a living out of this, and it's what's led there to be quite a tight-knit community, really, because those that are willing to give that up are quite respectful to each other, I think, for the most part.
I think that's pretty much everything off my tick list for what I think will be required to create a baseball team. Have you got any extra bits you want to throw in it? Is there anything that you don't think we've covered? Any important bits of information you'd like to share?
What I think I learned most in sort of the first year, to not get too fixated in branding, in image. I think what's in a brand, what's in the sort of social media work, is more what you create. Our name, the Bruins, was a placeholder, and now it's a huge part of our identity.
And I must say, I've seen you do logos that you've had done with the bear and the Union Jack and the goal one as well, and I think it looks amazing. It's a really nice bit of work.
Yeah, we've got. I think we've got one of the. I don't want to throw shade on any of the teams, but I think we've got one of the better social media teams going. You can find us at Chef Bruins on Instagram and Twitter, and just a Sheffield Bruins Baseball Club search on Facebook will find us. So we had our logo redone as a Union Jack bear for our trip to Seville, which I think you've lined up speaking to someone about. So I'll leave that to them.
Yeah, lovely. Seville's nice place to go play some baseball. It's a nice place to go if you're not playing baseball. So I'd like to wish you all the best luck on that, so I'm sure you'll have a great time.
Absolutely, yeah. We're taking an empty suitcase and trying to steal as much sand and fencing as we can and bring it back.
I forgot to mention that before in the field setup. How did you sort of get the equipment required to sort your field out? Was it just a case of getting a tin of paint and marking out the lines, or?
So originally, the council built into their fee that they were going to mark our field. I think we've sort of spruced it up in between because they sometimes let it go a bit longer than we'd like. In terms of that, it was just googling who did the cheapest fencing. The infield dirt and the mound was provided by, and I always kind of butcher this. We've got a player who, him and his dad work for separate companies, but they're both involved in farming and aggregates and agriculture and all that kind of business. A guy called Luke, and he sourced all of that for us and got us a very good deal. And I think it was just a case of that just arrived at the field one day, got dumped in the car park. And again, thank you to the pub for being okay with the fact that we had about 10 tons of loam, I think it's called, just across 2 disabled spots.
Brilliant. And it's another great example of I suppose community and players helping out for the greater cause. That's lovely. Charlie, that brings us to the end of the show. I'd like to, again, thank you so much for your time. I know you're a busy man, and I appreciate you taking the time to come and join us and share your story. And I believe we're going to have a chat with some of your playing staff and players and Tim as well while you're on tour in Seville to sort of give us a overview of the Bruins as a baseball club and your successes. So I'm very much excited to have you on again in the not too distant future.
Fantastic. Yeah, there's some great guys. I can't wait.
I'm sure if they're as nice as you, we'll all get on famously.
Well, some of them are, at least.
Oh, that's for names. All right, mate. Well, enjoy the rest of your evening, and I'll see you soon.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Take care, bud. Ta-ra.
Ta-ra.
So there you have it. That was the conversation with Charlie about how to create a ball club. I'd like to thank Dave at Hayes Unit on Twitter for asking a question about this. This was something I've been working on for quite a while, and I've been trying to get out into the audio realm for you all to hear for quite a bit. So Dave, I hope this is what you're looking for. And yeah, Charlie, thanks again, not just for giving up your Saturday when we first recorded this, but he also gave up more time on the Monday due to technical difficulties the first time we recorded. And he also allowed me to say his name incorrectly for 8 episodes. He keeps contributing questions for the guests that we have on, and I keep calling Charlie Batho, so he decided to mock me a little bit for. I'd love to hear from anyone who's also started any teams on your successes and struggles. And if anyone's actually been involved in creating a team for any universities or college, I'd like to hear what the differences were there and how that went too. As Charlie mentioned, you can find the Bruins on Facebook and on Twitter. He's also reachable at Charlie Batho, at Charlie Batho, at Charlie Batho on Twitter, and at Chef Bruins. While you're on Facebook, there's a really good page for those involved in British baseball called the British Baseball Clubhouse. It's a great place to keep in the loop for things that are happening around the league, and it's done by those that are involved in it too. So you want to ask any questions, it's a great place to get some answers from a lot of very knowledgeable people. And while you're at it, you can also like my page too while you're there. You know what it is by now, British Baseball Podcast. I'm off now to prepare for my baseball draft tomorrow by spending lots of hours on researching funny team names. I think I'm going to do the sensible thing of letting the computer auto pick my players for me. And that's it. Enjoy the rest of your week and stay tuned for some more guests that are coming next week.